Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis, 11 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is discussing when a person throws an object and it ends up going in a way that was not his original intention. What is the din? Says the Gemara as follows: Pshita niskavin lizrok shmoina v'zorak arba. Harei kosa shem mishimin. If a person throws an object thinking he's going to throw it 8 amos and it ends up going 4 amos, the Gemara says at this point he would be chayiv, just like if a person intends to write the name Shimon and he only writes the first 2 letters Shin Mem, then he's going to be chayiv for the name Shem, even though his initial intention is to write the entire name of Shimon. So to over here, when he intends to throw it 8 amos and it only goes 4 amos, he'll be chayiv. Niskavein lizorek arba v'zorek shmoina ma'u. But what happens in the opposite direction? Meaning to say that he threw it only 4 amos, he intended 4 amos, and it ended up going 8 amos. What would be the din in that situation? Mi amrin, do we say ha apik le? Do we say at the end of the day it went out from him, meaning it went out from the Rishus HaYochid to the Rishus HaRabim? Or he was in the Rishus HaRabim and threw it, intending to throw it 4 amos and then going even more, 8 amos, so he did at least the 4 amos. Or do we say no, where he wanted to go, it did not rest, and therefore he would be potter? Says the Gemara, V'lav hainu da'amrei le Ravina le Rav Ashi. Is it not what Ravina said to Rav Ashi? V'omar le ba'omer kol makom shetirtze tanuach. Only when a person intends to say that wherever it goes, he's satisfied, and therefore, then he would be chayiv. But if he does not have such an intention, then he must have the intention where he plans to throw it in order to be chayiv. And therefore, in this scenario, where he intends to throw it 4 amos, and he throws it 8 amos, he would be potter. And that which you said, though, that it's like writing Shem Mishimin, and he would be chayiv for writing Shin Mem, even though he intends to write the entire name Shimon. Midomi, what's the comparison? Hasam kamadeluksiv Shem lo machtiv le Shimon. If he doesn't write Shin Mem, he won't get to Shimon. So therefore, Shem is a name within the word Shimon. He has to write Shin Mem in order to get to the name Shimon. So he's chayiv. But hocha kamadeluzorik arbo lo mizdarki le tamni. Are you going to say if he doesn't throw 4, he will not throw 8? No. If he intends to throw 8 and he ends up throwing 4, so that's not his intention. He doesn't have to throw 4 if he wanted to throw it to 8. And therefore, he would not be chayiv, he'd be potter. Says the Gemara, Vaita, bringing another brayse, Tanu Rabbanon. Hazorek mirshus harabim. If a person throws in the Rishus HaRabim, the Rishus HaRabim, Rishus HaYochid be'emtza. He throws from one Rishus HaRabim through a Rishus HaYochid into another Rishus HaRabim. Says the brayse, Dalid Amois chayiv. If he throws Dalid Amois, he's going to be chayiv. Pochois midalad amos, potter. Less than dalad amos, we potter. My kamash malon. What is this coming to teach us? After all, he's throwing from Rishus HaRabim through the Rishus HaYochid into another Rishus HaRabim. What's the chiddush over here? Why does it say if he throws a dalad amos, then he's going to be chayiv, and less than that he'll be potter? Says the Gemara to explain. Ho kamash malon, rishuyos mitzdarfois, udloy amrin kluto kamisha huncha. Over here we're saying that the chiddush is that if you threw it, let's say from the first Rishus HaRabim 2 amos, then through the Rishus HaYochid, and then another 2 amos into the second Rishus HaRabim, so it's an entire 4 amos. We combine the 2 amos and the 2 amos to mechayev him a korban chatos. And we don't say kluta kavisha hun chodami as if it then landed in the air, whereby he's not going to be chayev for the hachnasa from the Rishus HaRabim into the Rishus HaYochid. And therefore we have a chiddush over here that the Rishuyos are mitzdarfos. Says the Gemara, Vaita Omar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Omar Rabbi Abo, Omar Rav Huna, Omar Rav. Hamavir Dalet Amois B'Rishus HaRabim, Mekura, Potter. Lefisha Eino Doime Ledigle Midbar. If a person is Mavir Dalet Amois in the Rishus HaRabim that is Mekura, that is roofed, he will not be chayiv, even though he's being mavir dalad amos. But a Rishus HaRabim is not defined as a Rishus HaRabim if it's not open on top. If it's roofed, therefore he will not be chayiv. the precedent is indeed from the Mishkan. We learn all of the milachos from the construction of the Mishkan, and so too over here, when they indeed had the diglei of the Midbar, that's where we learn the malacha of Havara from. So therefore, since over there the diglei HaMidbar did not have roofs, so too the Rishus HaRabim is not defined if it has a roof. It has to be unroofed to be a Rishus HaRabim. Eini asked the Gemara, is this so? Veho agolos the mikaros havyon. The agolos, they were makuros, they were roofed. In other words, the way that they would dismantle the Mishkan, they would take the planks, the crushing from the Mishkan, and then they would dismantle the Mishkan, they would place them on two agolos, which had in front of them two pairs of agolos. So they would take the beams and they would put them in the agolos. How would they put them? First of all, the beams, the crushing of the Mishkan, were a length of 10 amos. And they had a width of amma v'chetzi. So the agolos, they had the following dimensions. They had a length of 5 amos. They had a width of 2.5 amos. And between the agola and the end of the wheel on each side was 1.25 amos. So for both sides would be a total of 2.5 amos. So they would take the crushim and they would lay the crushim lengthwise, which would be on the width of the agolos, whereby then they would fill up the agolos, and they would do that on both agolos, each one next to each other. So the Gemara says as follows: the agolos were mekurin havyon; they were mekurin. V'omrav mishum Rabbi Chia agolos tachtein ubeinehem v'tzidei Rishus HaRabim. And yet, Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says that this was considered to be a Rishus HaRabim. That which was tachtehen, where the agolas themselves, where the halal of the agola was, the space of the agola, ubeineim, and between the agolos, as well as the tzideim, the space between the agola and the end of the wheels. That was all considered to be a Rishus HaRabim. So even though it was covered with the beams, nonetheless, we don't have a problem with a Rishus HaRabim being roofed because we have the present from the agolos. Says the Gemara, no, ki ka'omar Rav b'dirasa. When Rav was talking about that there is a Rishus HaRabim, he's talking about the space in between the planks. And therefore, that gave it the unroofed section of the Rishus HaRabim. Ask the Gemara, Michti. Now let us see. Orcha de agola kama havai. What was the length of the agola? Chamesh amin. The length of the agola was 5 amos. Putya de keresh kama havai. What was the width of the crushing of each keresh? 1.5 amos. Amta upalga, 1.5 amos. Kama moisid. How much would they be able to then put in each of the agolos? They would lay down 3 tlosa. So 3 times 1.5 gives us 4.5 amos of the 5 amos that is available. Therefore, the difference would be a half a amma. Pashule palga da amta. You have a half a amma left over, and then the spaces between the first and second, and the second and third keresh would then have to then be the space of this half a amma. Kishodile mar beni kilavu dami, whereby it would come out to be that the amount of a half a amma between these two spaces would only be a total of 1.5 tfachim. So it's less than lavud, whereby it would be considered to be lavud, and it would be closed, whereby you don't have an open space that is not roofed. Misavris asked the Gemara, Kroshim aputayu? Hava monachlu? Who said that the Kroshim were laid in a width fashion? Like we said, 1.5 amos is their width, and it was laid down that way, whereby it was 3 Kroshim, a total of 4.5 amos, giving an additional, the difference between 5 amos and 4.5 would be a half an amma, and then you would divide that, we said, between the spaces. which would give us less than lavud. Ask the Gemara, who said that was the way they laid down the keresh. Says the Gemara, Achudan monachlu. They would lay it down on the chudon, not on the width, but rather on the pointed part. Soif, and if you do that, soif, sumcha the keresh kamahabai. What would be then the thickness of the keresh that you're putting in the agolos for each keresh? Amta would be 1 amma. And how would they then load up the agola? Kama hava moisif arba. They would put 4, because they wouldn't put all 5, because they would want a little bit of space. It would be too tight to make all 5. So they put 4. So that means that you have 4 amos, and the difference between 4 amos and the entire agola of 5 amos would give a difference of 1 amma. So the Gemara says, Pasha la'amta, we have 1 amma now left over. So now to fit between the krushim, if we're talking about how many krushim, let's see. Kishadi lemar beni kilvudami. If you're going to have 4 krushim, that means between the first and second and third and fourth krushim, there's 3 different spaces. 3 different spaces. If you take the 1 amma to then be the entire 1 amma between all of these spaces, you're left with less than lavud, which means you have a entire space of 2 tfachim for each space. That's less than lavud, whereby it's considered to be closed. So again, you don't have a non-roofed reshus harabim. So Gemara says, Hanicha lamanda omar kroshi milamaton ovyon amma milamalon kolim v'holchin ad ke'etz b'shapir. There's a machloikis about when it comes to the krushim. We know that it was 1 amma. That was 1 amma of its thickness, but there's a machloikis whether the amma was its thickness from the beginning, from the base all the way to the end, or did it get narrow throughout the keresh. So if it was according to the manda omer that it gets narrow, so then it would be shapir, because then you would have more of a space beyond the amount we said before, which would not be an issue of lavud, and then you can have your non-roofed reshus harabim. El lamanda omer kishem shelamaton ovyon amma kach melamala ovyon amma ma'ikil memar. But the one who does hold that when it comes to the thickness of each keresh, it remains the same thickness from the base all the way till the end, so then you're going to have a situation where it's going to be lavud, and therefore again it's going to be makura. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Kahana ba'at boy. Rav Kahana answers that we're talking about ba'at boy, whereby the tabos that are on the krushim, in order to secure the krushim, they make it so that you can't lay down all of those krushim one next to the other. You can only lay down 2, one that's with the tabas facing outwards, while the other one, which is flush against it, would have the tabas facing inwards. So then that way you can then line them up. And therefore, says the Gemara, Ataboy heiche manachluhu. Where would you place the taboy? Agova the agola, on the top of the agola. So therefore would come out that indeed, then you would have a situation where you would have then enough space where it's not roofed, and whereby we have a reshus harabim without roof. Ask the Gemara, but still agola gufa mekura havoy. But that might be true above, but down below, beneath where the krushim were placed, there is a place where it's covered, whereby that makes it so that the reshus harabim is covered. Answers the Gemara on the top of Daf Tzaddik Ches Amud Beis, Omar Shmuel b'Yiseidos. We're not talking about where it was covered down below. That's a mistake. Indeed, the way it was set up was with Yiseidos. And therefore we have our situation where we found indeed a agolos that had a reshus harabim that were having the krushim on top of them in a way where it was situated that they didn't have roofs.